Welcome to hashtag 52 Needs. And this week we are exploring what autonomy means. And I have with me Chris Chittenden, who's a really good friend and a wonderful coach who has been involved in the world of coaching since 1994 and worked as a professional coach since 1999. Chris has spent most of his professional life with leaders in organization, and now he puts his energy into helping people in life transition, particularly people in their 20s. The focus of this work is to help them learn how to navigate the uncertainty of the future and create meaningful and fulfilling lives. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Angela. How are you?
Very well, thank you. So, autonomy at work. I mean, you and I have been working with leaders for a long time. And if there's one thing that I think we both have on automatic, it's autonomy is one of the core needs of an adult. Autonomy at work is absolutely crucial so people can feel competent and achieve and feel fulfilled in their work.
Yes.
Do we have people autonomy at work, or do we just talk about it?
I think we just talk about it, to be honest. I think we just talk about it. There's been lots of conversations in the world of which I've worked over the years about empowerment and helping people have empowerment, and yet I see far more to do with control than trust, which empowerment obviously involves trust. But organisations tend to set themselves up to seek control, not to build trust. One of the interesting things that I've often found in looking at organisations is you look at their values, and pretty much every organisation will come up with trust or something similar. Oh, yeah, what's that?
It's a mouse pad. It normally has all the values on it.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. Sorry, I was confused. But yeah, you normally see that they come up with trust. And they'll talk about it as something that they want to build, and collaboration and teamwork and all those sort of things. But as soon as something goes wrong, what do? They introduce a policy that actually demonstrates that they don't trust people. They sort of restrict, and they create boundaries around what people are allowed to do, rules, regulations, and all that sort of stuff. And we obviously do that throughout society. I mean, I'm not suggesting that organisations are unique by doing that. But it does fly in the face of building trust and empowering people. So to empower people, we need to trust them.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations that's often shown up in my work is that people really don't have much of a sense of how to build trust. They talk about it, but they don't necessarily understand the principles that you follow to do that. And under stress, which it would appear that organisations and people are far more under stress today, the natural instinct is to go to control, is to stop trusting and actually sort of start making choices for other people, because it creates this sense of being more certain and getting the outcome that you want. But obviously that then gets in the way of people who are sort of further down within an organisation. If you look at an organisation as a hierarchy, because they end up just having to do what they're told to do.
Yeah.
And in many ways, you find organisations setting up to be quite regimented in procedures and policies, what you can't do, as opposed to what you can do, and the space for what you can do and being much more limited.
Yeah.
I would think that there are organisations in the world that are far more creative and do have different policies about all of that, but so many organisations are not. They're quite restricted to what they can do and what they can't do.
Well, my sense is that autonomy is generally also defined as supporting or creating a work environment in which somebody can operate and perform to the best of their ability. And it's often not about that. It's not about ability. It's about conforming and creating results that have been predetermined, that have absolutely nothing to do with a person's capabilities. So it's you go from A to B. And it's with more technology, for example, we're losing a lot of that autonomy, because I mean, I talk to people on the phone, for example, about, I don't know, insurances or banking or whatever it might be. And they say, I would love to make that decision and I would love to help you with this, but my system just won't allow me to do that. I have to follow my computer because otherwise I just get tossed out or whatever it might be. So it's not necessarily just people, but it's technology that we have created to supposedly make work easier. that kicks us out and eliminates that autonomy that we need in order to feel that we're actually making a difference, I think.
Well, I must say that I find nothing more frustrating than ringing up a telecommunications company and getting their automated system that bounces you through all these numbers, and I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And yes, and then you get to the other end, and all you do is get the person with the script.
Yeah.
And they just go through boom, 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 boom.
Yes. And I have to say, I have said to people, that's a lovely script you're reading. Can we divert from that and actually have a conversation? And they go, yeah, but I have to follow that. And they literally have that on their computer screen, and they have to tick things off as they go. But it's not just people who are following an automated process. It's also working with people who have some sort of autonomy in how they do it, but they get these. There's I hear this all the time, when I've got leaders sitting in front of me, and I just tell them if they would just do what I tell them to do. And I tell them, it's like, and I say to people, okay, you may have the same goal in mind, but you may go, this is the way we go. And the person may go, I want to go like this. You'll still get to that goal, but the person will have a sense of achievement that is very different from when you're predetermining, go step 1, 2, 3, 4, and do not divert from that. There is no step to A. There's no step. You don't go from A to D. You have to go from A to B. And a lot of people get really anxious around that because their KPIs that attach to that, there are all sorts of things that again, take away that autonomy. And I find it sometimes really difficult to say to people, letting go is really the key here.
Well, in many ways, it's about creating a trusting environment, isn't it? It's about trusting that people are capable of doing what you're asking them to do.
Yes.
I think you in some ways you've come to a pertinent point about the KPIs and things like that. Is that what happens is that people have a vested interest in getting an outcome, which means that they're under stress to get that outcome, which means they're going to seek to control other people in terms of doing that, which is sort of clearly the opposite of building trust. So I think the challenge lies in that we want people to be autonomous in the workplace. We want them to be able to make effective choices. And in principle, organisational structures should be defining who can make what choices in what positions, but they don't do a very good job of that. That in essence, what you have is people competing over establishing their own power within an organisation, because the way that the organisations are structured is not particularly well thought out. And the other thing that they don't have are practices that help you resolve the greyness of organisations.
Yeah.
Like,
and of course,
who's responsible for what, sort of thing.
Exactly. And of course, then there are people who come in as the rescuer. The typical, transactional analysis model of the rescuer, the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. Like when somebody goes to their boss and says, I've got an issue here, the boss goes, I'll handle that, don't worry. And there's no autonomy in telling somebody, okay, so do you know how you want to resolve that issue? Do you have the tools and the skills to do that? Well, let's work on that. So I don't just give you a fish, I actually teach you how to fish. But it's much easier to say, let me just fix that.
Well, we are problem solvers. It's one of the interesting things that I've found talking with leaders over the years. I used to ask them, what are 3 words that you think describe leadership? And the number of people who said to me a problem solver doesn't bear thinking about. And I always found that an interesting idea from a leadership point of view, because the way I always thought about that was, well, when do problems show up? Well, they just show up. You don't plan problems, they just show up. So what does that mean? That basically as a leader, you're a reactive person because you're always reacting to the latest problem, which potentially becomes the latest crisis. And then you found organisations, particularly those, I found this particularly around engineering type organisations, where a lot of the people who are in charge of engineering organisations were engineers. And when you actually explore with them why they became engineers in the first place, they love to solve problems. And of course, they were great technically, but from the point of view of people don't like to be feeling like they're a problem.
No.
And yet they were treating them like a problem and analysing and providing a solution. And so there was always this thing that they were trying to solve the problem of whatever was
Which
going
means
on. It
you
just
will
wasn't very
always
effective.
have, they always have to be involved in whatever happens. That's the start of micromanagement. So I know that when I talk to leaders and I say, as your job as a leader is to make yourself redundant, there's almost an anxiety response. But no, but if I'm redundant, what happens to my job? Well, then you get to do the things that you're supposed to do as a leader, make sure that everybody gets to do their job without you interfering. And it's really hard because we grew up in this whole, the parent will take care of the child, and in the hierarchy, that's often still the model that we're using at work.
It is, yeah. I sort of like the idea that leadership is about creating environments and a space. So you're trying to create a space in some ways so that people can do what they need to do. And then you create that space, and then you move that space in a direction, or whatever the vision is, and develop strategies and goals associated with that, and that's fine. But in some ways, it's about how do people feel that they fit in? How do they create meaningful existences within those spaces, in some ways, going in a certain direction?
Yeah.
And I think the challenge for a lot of organisations, like I know that there was a big push, well, a little while ago now, I don't know if it's still the case, where they used to bring in these leadership experts who had been successful with sporting teams, etc. And they tried to apply the same approaches to organisations as the sporting teams. And the thing that I always thought was missing in there was that in a sporting team, you knew what the goal was. It was always clear about what the goal was. It was win the game, win the premiership, whatever it happened to be. But in an organisation, that goal is nowhere near well defined for the people who are actually doing all the work.
Yeah.
And certainly if it's around profit and shareholder value and all that sort of stuff, my experience is that most people who are working in organisations don't give much of a hoot about profitability and stakeholder value. They're interested in what they have to achieve at work. And so it's about how do you create more meaningful experiences for people within the workplaces that relate to them. And you allow them then to make their decisions within those domains of activity. And that's about, again, it's an environment of trust, isn't it? In some ways, is that you're trying to build an environment of trust that allows people to make the decisions regardless of what the boss might want, as long as the outcomes that are produced are valid and useful and timely and all the other things that you need them potentially to be, which goes back to what you were saying before.
Yeah. So do you think that this has changed a little bit with COVID, because now people work completely different? It's the working from home. There seems to be more autonomy, and I'm not really sure, but I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I think there's a brewing challenge showing up for organisations, as some organisations want their workers to go back to the office, and others are happy to maintain the situations that they've had through COVID, and others want hybrids in some ways. I know, having worked with a few people through that period of time, that the ones who are great at building trust and having the conversations and recognising that it's about how do you keep people engaged, were pretty successful at doing it. It's the ones who sit there and go, I don't trust what they're doing. They just have an attitude that the people are always trying to sneak around and get away with and not do as little as possible, all of that sort of stuff.
Children.
And yes, they're children. And I think that's for me, that obviously speaks more to the person who holds that opinion than to the people that they're talking about. Because certainly my experience is that most people want to do a good job. You're always going to find some people who don't, but most people want to do a good job. And then it's how do you manage, or at least how do you engage with the people who are not performing as well as you would like to perform. But I suspect that for all the stuff that's been done on leadership development over the years, most people still cling to the idea of control and still cling to the idea of I need to make the decisions, and organisational structures are set up for all of this, like authority chains and signatures and all those sort of things. In principle, take a lot of work. They actually are inefficient in the way that they do stuff. And that one of the things that's clear for me is that if you can build a really strong based trusting organisation or trust-based organisation, then it reduces the amount of work you have to do because you're not having to check up so much.
Yeah.
If you knew that if I worked for you and you knew that I was going to tell you if something wasn't on track, you wouldn't have to keep checking up on me. But people don't have those conversations, so therefore they're always checking up on people to make sure that they've done the right thing.
And it just creates so much anxiety for everyone. And for both the leader as well as for the team member, because the leader is constantly going, are they doing what they're supposed to doing? And the team member goes, they might be checking up on me. I mean, I've talked to people who, go to the bathroom with their phone because they're at home, and if they don't answer the phone immediately, there's that perception that they're not available, that they're having a lazy day or something, that they just feel that they have to be constantly on. They can't do anything. There's no, at work in the office, I think the average productive time that somebody has in an office environment is 3 hours or 3.5 hours per day. The rest of the time is spent talking, socializing, talking at the water cooler, tossing ideas around, whatever it might be, but we're socializing with people. Whereas at work, we're Zooming, we're just focused on what we're doing. And then, so it just becomes a very different environment, but we still have to be as productive, as we should have been in the office, but the standards have shifted.
Yes.
And it's becomes very, very challenging to keep up that kind of productivity. I mean, there's a reason why we have Zoom fatigue and why we just get into this place of, I'm just done. I just can't do this any longer.
Yeah. I certainly agree with all of that. I think that in part, it's also a definition of what is being productive mean. So it's almost like work is only producing something tangible in some ways, as opposed to all these conversations that are useful. Or if they weren't useful, why would you be having them in the first place? And some of it's social, I get that, but a lot of it is about the creativeness of ideas, or trying to work out how to navigate, the politics of an office or whatever it might happen to be, or simply seeking help from other people, having questions answered, finding out more information that you need to know in order to be able to do whatever it is you need to do. And I think that certainly one of the biggest changes that I've seen over the many years that I've been working these days anyway, is that these days leaders, people in management positions, have to produce work as much as manage people. And indeed, if anything, managing people is seen as
an obstacle.
Yeah, it gets in the way of me doing my job. Which seems somewhat ironic, given that their job is to develop and get the most out of the people who work for them in some ways. And so the whole then principle of autonomy lies in that if you can distribute decision making within a group of people, then you don't get bottlenecks of decision making. So you become more productive simply out of that simple exercise. Is that if you trust people to do their job and do it well, and have feedback loops that allow you to notice when things have gone offline a little bit, then in principle, you spend a hell of a lot less time waiting for things to occur. You speed up processes, you speed up the activity within the organisation, and you generate more outcomes for the organisation. No, go on, you go.
No, I was going to say that we've had this conversation before, that autonomy is not necessarily a comfortable process, that we have to accept that, there are questions that are being raised, and that you have to discuss certain things because, my autonomy may not necessarily fit in with your model of autonomy, or what I think is your box of autonomy that you have a right to, and then the autonomy ends, and then it's my right to control. But to be able to question that and have a conversation about that, and saying, how can I actually, bust out of the box, or at least make the box bigger so I've got more room to move around, so I get that sense of autonomy, is really crucial. But we don't teach people how to have these conversations.
No, we don't. We don't teach people effective conversation practices at all.
Which is why your work is so important.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as yes. I think it is. A lot of that is that there are practices of conversation that you can work your way through if you can see what you're trying to do. And the challenge is that most people don't understand that. They don't understand the way that we use language to frame things up. They don't understand the power of, particularly of promises, commitments that we make to each other. I wrote a lengthy article at one point about accountability. And my view around accountability was that you can only hold people to account to things they've committed to do. And the challenge wasn't so much about holding people to account. It was that people wouldn't commit to do stuff.
Yeah.
They were either just told to do it, which meant it was thought they were committed to doing it, but they weren't. They were just told, which is very disempowering from the point of view of how people feel about their work. Or they let people get away with what we would talk about as slippery promises, where they would talk about trying to do something, or they might do it. That sort of language was used. But in many ways, the key to building trust, one of the keys to building trust, is actually making commitments and delivering on them and managing them if you can't deliver on them. It's one of the fundamentals of building trust, that people don't know that pattern of conversation. There's a very clear pattern of conversation that was developed many years ago that's been called the promise cycle. I call it an action conversation that looks into how people make requests, negotiate commitment, then follow through on their commitments, and then assess whatever the outcome of that commitment might be in order to generate, firstly, getting things done, but also a sense of achievement and gratitude for the people doing work for you and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, people don't think about that too much. You look into any organisation and you see holes in the way that people handle their promises wherever you go. And in many ways, for me, coaching is a simple practice. It's a practice of having an effective conversation with people. And the beautiful simplicity of that is that all I'm doing is having a conversation with them in a way that is finding the things that they're not having a conversation about. So it's like you take them through a conversation, noticing the things that they don't know how to have a conversation about, and then hopefully teaching them how to do that to some degree. But we don't teach people how to have conversations very effectively. We don't teach people how to build trust very effectively. We don't teach people how to resolve breakdowns within relationships very effectively. If I had $1 for every time somebody said to me they're two adults, they should be able to work it out, I'd be a very, very rich man. And the irony is I've made a good living out of helping two adults who can't work out how to resolve things, work out how to resolve things. And I think that's part of the key is that sometimes we need people to facilitate some conversations to bring them to solutions. But that also includes then learning how to make choices together.
And that's the autonomy. It's not telling them what outcomes to achieve, but it's the autonomy to make choices that work for them.
Absolutely.
That sounds like a good place to stop.
Okay.
And yes, my invitation would be everybody explore your box of autonomy and discuss it with the people you work with and negotiate, because often we just go and just take whatever dictate comes from above. This is the way the world works and this is how we do it. And we don't question that. So, and as a leader, encourage people to have that autonomy. Go and have discussions with them and agree to disagree with them and really support them in being and making decisions that may not necessarily work for you, but it may work for work or for the organization. But we can talk about this for another 20 minutes easily. Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure to have you and sharing your wisdom. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you next week.